Tonight on Cross Currents, a dramatic new documentary about Cambodia today. It's a tragically sick and vulnerable nation. Now, after 10 years of occupation, the Vietnamese have pulled out, and Cambodia is once again at the mercy of an old enemy, the Khmer Rouge. Cross Currents with Jim Carney.
Cross Currents is a series of top documentary films from around the world on significant international events and issues, the kind of things we think you want to know more about. And tonight we begin a new season. Our first 4 programs deal with Asia, with films from Cambodia, Burma, and Tibet. A later program looks at nuclear testing in the South Pacific and the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior. Another presents a frightening picture of the death squads in El Salvador. But we're not ignoring Europe and Africa. One astonishing film takes us inside one of the many psychiatric hospitals in the Soviet Union, allegedly used to silence political dissidents. Another deals with the apparently widespread use of torture in Turkey to inhibit political opposition. One film describes the rise of neo-Nazism among a small segment of the youth of Great Britain, while another, in heartbreaking contrast, portrays the tragedy of the child victims of the wars in Mozambique and Angola. The films we present on Cross Currents are made by a variety of different producers and broadcast organizations around the world. They're not instant reports. Some have been months, even years in the making. They may reflect a different or unconventional point of view. Some may make you angry. Some may make you uncomfortable. Some may move you to do something, even if it is only to care a little more. Tonight's film is a good example. You may have been surprised to read last summer that 19 governments, including Canada and several of the major powers, met in Paris in August to discuss the kind of government Cambodia should have. Now, ordinarily, I would suspect Cambodia has little significance for most of us, a kind of third world backwater associated with the Vietnam War long ago. How does Cambodia rate the attention of 19 governments in Paris? What's at stake? Well, there's a fascinating international squeeze play going on, and Cambodia is once again the nut in the nutcracker. And if you think it doesn't matter, remember Vietnam. In 1970, at the height of the Vietnam War, in an action expressly prohibited by Congress, the U.S. Air Force secretly launched massive bombing raids against Cambodia. President Nixon's intention, he was reported to have said, was to bomb Cambodia into the Stone Age. The reason was that North Vietnamese troops were using supply bases or sanctuaries in Cambodia from which to sustain their war against South Vietnamese and American forces. Out of this chaos and destruction came a new political force in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge. In 1975, under a group of fanatic ultranationalist communists led by Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge defeated the forces of US-backed Lon Nol and formed a new government dedicated to the ideal of establishing the world's first truly socialist state. Inspired by this dream, the Pol Pot regime initiated one of the most murderous and destructive campaigns in history. Between 1975 and 1979, it's estimated that some 1 million to 3 million Cambodians died. That is between 1/4 and 1/2 of the population. Many died of starvation and disease, but the vast majority were butchered by the Khmer Rouge. In 1978 and 79, Vietnamese troops invaded Cambodia, threw out Pol Pot, and installed a Vietnamese-backed government which governed Cambodia for the next 10 years. An action that the United States has continually portrayed as an illegal aggression. In 1989, fed up with the drain on its resources and the worldwide criticism of its occupation of Cambodia, Vietnam announced it was pulling out. And this brings us to Paris in August of 1989. For the Vietnam pullout raised the awkward question of who or what would form the new government of Cambodia, or more to the point, whose friends they would be. There were four major groups who wanted to be in on the action. First, of course, the incumbent pro-Vietnamese Cambodian government under Premier Hun Sen. Then, ranged against him was a tripartite coalition made up of followers of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, an extraordinary political stick handler who has run Cambodia, with several interruptions, for much of the last 50 years. The Khmer People's National Liberation Front, under a former Prime Minister, Son Sen, and, believe it or not, the Khmer Rouge. Incredibly, it is this last unlikely trio that is recognized by the West, including Canada and the United Nations, as the legitimate government of Cambodia. The incumbent pro-Vietnamese government is insisting that the Khmer Rouge not be a part of any new government. The other side, generally supported by the West, is insisting that the Khmer Rouge be included in the new government. Now, you may wonder, why would anyone, much less our side, want to see the Khmer Rouge, known for one of the worst acts of mass murder in history, and radical communists at that, as part of a future Southeast Asia government? The answer, basically, is China. China continues to supply and support the Khmer Rouge because that gives her clout in Cambodian affairs, vis-a-vis her regional arch-enemy, Vietnam, and Vietnam's big brother, the Soviet Union. China wants a pro-Chinese government, which includes the Khmer Rouge, because with that, Vietnam is surrounded and more or less isolated by hostile neighbors, China, Cambodia, Thailand. On the other hand, with a pro-Vietnamese government in Cambodia, China is surrounded by enemies, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Burma, and the USSR. And the Western powers, in this instance, all things considered, they see more advantage to themselves in supporting China. In 1979, shortly after the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia and the ousting of Pol Pot, John Pilger, an outstanding British journalist, documented the legacy of the Pol Pot regime in a film called Year Zero. That film is credited with inspiring emergency aid that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. In 1989, John Pilger returned to Cambodia to record the changes 10 years later in the film we're about to see. It's called Cambodia Year 10. Tonight is the first time this film has been telecast in Canada. It reflects, in part, the prospect that a new Cambodian government will include the Khmer Rouge, a prospect most Cambodians find terrifying.
This is Cambodia 1989. It is 10 years since the showing of our documentary Year Zero, and the following report is being broadcast tonight in a number of countries at a critical time in the unique recent history of this one small country, Cambodia. Year Zero told of the suffering of the people of Cambodia under Pol Pot and his murderous Khmer Rouge. More than 1 million people, perhaps many more, were killed or starved to death between 1975 and 1979. No society this century has been as willfully devastated as Cambodia. Not even Hitler's attempts to exterminate the Jews matched the scale of Pol Pot's crimes against his own people. And it was after that Holocaust that the world community formed the United Nations so that it would never happen again. But it did happen again, and for those of you who may have forgotten, this is what happened. The genocide did not begin with Pol Pot. It began in 1969 when President Nixon launched a secret war against neutral Cambodia, upon which American bombers dropped the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas. Out of the inferno came Pol Pot and his fanatical Khmer Rouge, who exploited the devastation. Together, the American bombing and Pol Pot's bloody revolution caused 1 million dead and wounded. And that was just the beginning. At dawn on April the 17th, 1975, all of Cambodia fell to the Khmer Rouge, who immediately ordered the evacuation of the capital, Phnom Penh. The sick and wounded were dragged from their hospital beds. Dying children were carried in plastic bags. The old and crippled were dumped beside the road. The rest were marched at gunpoint into the countryside, from which most never returned. The ideology of the Khmer Rouge was based on the Cultural Revolution unleashed by Mao Zedong in China in the 1960s, whose aim, like that of Pol Pot, was a return to the political purity of a docile peasantry. In other words, slavery. To this, the Khmer Rouge added a medieval bloodletting and created Auschwitz in Asia. Here at Tul Sleng extermination camp in Phnom Penh, up to 18,000 people were tortured and murdered by a Gestapo called S-21. Like the Nazis, the Khmer Rouge photographed their victims before and after they starved them, hanged them, strangled them, and cut their throats.
My wife, my son, my daughter, anything will be gone.
They were killed?
They killed. Gone. We have only my child, only one.
How many children were killed?
5.
5 children?
5 children. Yeah.
How were they killed?
He don't give to any to eat.
I see, they starved.
2 months, anything with anything. No rice, no soup, no anything.
My sister with her husband and 6 children were killed. My brother, my older brother, one younger brother, and 2 brother-in-laws were killed.
My father was killed, and my brother was killed too.
I lost my children, I lost my wife. A group of family, I left the city of Phnom Penh in 1975. We counted 24 people. One day, 24 people left in the group. 3 returned in 1979.
All the rest were killed?
Yes.
To the Khmer Rouge, 1975 was year 0, the dawn of an age in which there would be no families, no sentiment, no expression of love or grief, no medicines, no hospitals, no schools, no books, no learning, no holidays, no music, no post, no money, only work and death. The Vietnamese arrived in December 1978 and put an end to the genocide. This is what they found. Already these dying children were pawns in a game. Western governments condemned Vietnam for driving out Pol Pot, and international relief was withheld. In 9 months, only 3 planes came from the West. However, by 1980, the television cameras had turned to new disasters, and a silence was contrived by governments, including Western governments, which protected, encouraged, and revitalized Pol Pot and his murderers. This was done openly with diplomatic cynicism and secretly with millions of dollars. The surviving people of Cambodia were isolated and punished because their liberators, the Vietnamese, had come from the wrong side of the Cold War. This film is about extraordinary events which have allowed Asia's Hitler to rise again and the prospect of the previously unthinkable happening again. I felt deeply uneasy about returning to Cambodia. The memories of 10 years ago are indelible, and now that the Vietnamese have left, almost everybody I know is in fear of their lives again. And yet there's a normality here. It has a seductive quality. The moment is just long enough and deceptive enough to suspend fear. Phnom Penh, the capital. The normality here is all the more remarkable because people have created the illusion with nothing, just their courage and resilience. Through the broken window in my hotel room, I watch the same children every day working the layers of rubbish. For most people, there is no power, no water, no sanitation. This is a city of 1 million squatters. The owners of the houses and flats and shops are almost all dead. Yet the people who've replaced them could vanish overnight. It's as if they're on furlough, waiting, ready to fight or run. Television sustains the unreality, showing cookery classes from Russia and soft porn from Hungary. The cinema has soaps from India. There are streets where anything can be repaired and restored. Most people have changed their names, a precaution. And few wear glasses. People with glasses were among the first to be killed. And phones do not ring. Cambodia has been banned from all Western communications treaties, and from the United Nations, from the World Health Organization, from the UN Development Fund, airline agreements, trade pacts. The blockade is complete. The people hear silence. The mood can change without warning. In this area, those who survived the American bombing were forced by the Khmer Rouge to wear a special blue scarf to label them for extermination, just as the Nazis made the Jews wear a yellow star. Shrines like this are common throughout Cambodia. The world may have forgotten. Here it's impossible. Near Phnom Penh, more than 8,000 of those murdered in Tul Sleng extermination camp were buried in mass graves. They include many children and foreigners, British, American, Australian. Cambodia is today mostly women and children. In some areas, 70% are women, many of them widows forced to watch the murder of their families and then forced to marry someone they didn't know. The trauma often stopped them menstruating. For 10 years, they've received no help from any international agency. It is most unusual to meet a woman who lost fewer than 6 members of her family, killed and dumped in a place like this. And here are their clothes still in the earth. A pair of trousers, part of a shirt, and skulls and bones everywhere. Nothing in my career as a journalist prepared me for the horrors I found in Cambodia. Like those who came upon Auschwitz and Belsen, the experience and the shock are difficult to describe. And yet 10 years later, I find myself shocked again and seriously doubting if the enormity of what happened here is understood outside. How can it be understood when those responsible are not only allowed to go free and unpunished, but are living comfortably with expense accounts? The head of the extermination center at Tul Sleng was called Comrade Dutch. His chief torturer was Comrade Pon. All around me are the graves of their victims. Today, both these men are guests of the government of Thailand, where they are protected and sustained with the United Nations aid. Pol Pot himself lives here in a Thai military camp known as V4 near the town of Trat. Thai troops escort him to his luxurious beach house at Bang Sien, a tourist resort, and to this modern hospital in Bangkok, where the man who brought genocide and starvation to his people is treated for irritating hemorrhoids. Few geopolitical games have been as cynical and bereft of all moral consideration as that which has isolated and punished the people of Cambodia. In 1979, President Carter's National Security Advisor, Dr. Brzezinski, implemented a policy known as playing the China card. The aim was to cultivate China and to further divide Peking and Moscow. But China's oldest enemy is Vietnam, which occupies a strategic bridge to the rest of Asia. Since 1975, Peking had backed Pol Pot as a means of destabilizing neighboring Vietnam. And Chinese support for Pol Pot continued after the Vietnamese drove the Khmer Rouge into Thailand. Moreover, the United States backed China and led an economic boycott of Vietnam and Cambodia. In Washington, there was, and still is, great bitterness that Vietnam had defeated and humiliated the United States. Revenge became the policy. Off the record, officials spoke about bleeding Vietnam white on the battlefield of Cambodia. The Thai border camps became a media circus. In 1980, State Department sources revealed plans for an international propaganda campaign aimed at spreading atrocity stories about Vietnamese behavior in Cambodia. This drew attention away from the Khmer Rouge, which the United States was then secretly backing. Dr. Brzezinski himself briefed leading journalists, such as James Reston of the New York Times and the BBC's Alastair Cook. They were shown a CIA report which accused the Vietnamese of refusing to relieve the suffering of the Cambodian people. No journalist questioned the authenticity of the report, and Reston wrote an impassioned article which was syndicated widely. The briefing journalists received was based entirely on false information. Genocide was now associated not only with Pol Pot, but with those who had ended the slaughter. Prime Minister Thatcher supported American and Chinese policy and visited the Cambodian refugee camps just over the border in Thailand, where British SAS troops trained Cambodian guerrillas allied with the Khmer Rouge. Mrs. Thatcher did not see any of the camps where the United Nations Border Relief Operation allows the Khmer Rouge to hold 45,000 people hostage.
Everyone having suffered under Pol Pot, and you know, we saw some of the terrible pictures and accounts of the atrocities at home, and I think we were all perturbed that we couldn't do something about it, and the United Nations couldn't do anything about it.
In fact, Mrs. Thatcher's government warned off relief organizations from flying aid directly into Cambodia in 1979.
We were told consistently through 1979 and 1980 that our supplies wouldn't get through, that they wouldn't be distributed effectively. Our government had no first-hand evidence of this. Ultimately, of course, we were vindicated. The supplies not only were getting through then, they continue to get through now. But this was a distortion of what was happening.
Contrary to the propaganda, for much of 1979, the only food reaching Cambodia came from Vietnam, in convoys such as this, which we witnessed arriving. But in the United States, this truth was overwhelmed by a message so many wanted to hear, that Vietnam was an invader and an international outlaw. No mention was made that Vietnam was defending itself against repeated attacks by Pol Pot's army and had tried to persuade the United Nations to intervene. Now it could be said that the American war against Vietnam had been justified. A noble cause, as President Reagan had called it. And this new truth quickly went forth to Hollywood. There was no mention of the fact that the United States, through the United Nations, was sustaining the Khmer Rouge in camps along the border with Thailand. In 1980, we filmed this food convoy going to a Khmer Rouge camp. It is paid for by Western governments. The commander of the camp was called Nam Phan and was known to aid workers as the Butcher and Pol Pot's Himmler. The United States government wrote to American relief workers Linda Mason and Roger Brown, insisted that the Khmer Rouge be fed. The United States preferred that the Khmer Rouge operation benefit from the credibility of an internationally known relief operation. The meaning of all this was clear, but it seldom made news. A revitalized Khmer Rouge was to continue America's war against Vietnam by other means, and a generation of Vietnamese suffering and struggle was to be discredited. Today in Saigon lie young Vietnamese soldiers, the other victims of international cynicism. Now, this soldier here, I think he was also wounded in Cambodia. How many years has he been injured like this?
In 1982.
Yeah. How old is he?
Anh bao nhiêu tuổi năm nay? Dạ 30, 30 years old.
30 years old, yeah. He's a courageous man. I can tell him he smiled, eh?
Anh nói là trong anh cũng như anh kia là vẫn thấy là vẫn cười rồi vẫn lạc quan được.
And this lady over here is his girlfriend, I believe. Is that correct?
You're right.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I could tell by the way she's looking at him.
Anh đã đoán trước được như vậy.
We wish him well. Thank you.
Anh hy vọng anh chúc anh là
People say the Vietnam invade. I say also the Vietnam invade, but I got to give a credit to the Vietnamese army, because without them, the Khmer Rouge would kill more and more Cambodian people. For me, as a messenger, I like to say that the Vietnamese invade and liberate Cambodia, and now the Vietnamese are leaving. We, the Cambodian people, want to hear that the world try to prevent the return of the Khmer Rouge.
These were among the last Vietnamese troops to leave. They have trained a Cambodian army and militia which have none of the combat experience of the Khmer Rouge and none of the arms and supplies provided by China and the West.
The Khmer Rouge threat is enormous, and the tragedy is that we didn't have to come to this, that the United States, and I think our policy through Democratic and Republican administrations, has been to cynically use the Khmer Rouge as a lever to force the Vietnamese out of Cambodia without any thought to the long range, to what happens after you've created this monster. How do you control it? And now we come to the moment of truth.
And how many divisions of Khmer Rouge are actually in this area now?
There are 5 divisions.
And each Khmer Rouge division is about 500 or 600 men.
Each division consists of 600 men.
Right, so that's about 3,500 Khmer Rouge troops are actually in this area now. And what are they doing?
They are engaging in individual attacks. They are waiting until after the Vietnamese pull out.
Clearly what he's saying is there's going to be a major attack by the Khmer Rouge.
That's correct.
What form will that attack take?
They will be engaging in full-scale attacks throughout the country in order to try and take over the country.
It's difficult for a foreigner to understand the fear that so many Cambodian people feel about the return of Pol Pot unless you come here to the West, where the black-shirted troops of Pol Pot are part of the shadows that sweep across the fields and paddies after the rains, and where every journey carries great risk. This road near Persat was opened only last year, and you're advised to travel early in the morning when the roads are said to be cleared of mines and reach your destination no later than mid-afternoon, when the Khmer Rouge may reappear or they may not. The uncertainty you feel, the fear, is a glimpse into the heart of this stricken country. This is the future for Cambodia. This rare film, taken in May of this year, shows Pol Pot's troops, together with those loyal to Prince Sihanouk, attacking a town and terrorizing people. Attacks like this are now common. Few of them are reported. Once again, the Khmer Rouge destroy a hospital and satisfy their obsession for taking photographs not only of their victims, but of themselves. And they loot the possessions of the poorest people: a bicycle, farm implements, clothes, and a tractor so precious that the loss of this one will mean that land essential to prevent starvation will not be farmed. All over Cambodia, people have fled, leaving their homes deserted, the countryside silent. Of course, the Khmer Rouge would be nothing without the mines and weapons they receive, mainly from China, but also from other sources. While we were filming here, it was announced that President Bush had approved American arms for what was called the non-communist resistance. But as everybody knows, that means Pol Pot. An official of the State Department said that the purpose of the arms was to speed up the peace process.
From 1953 to 1970, Cambodia didn't have enough soldiers, didn't have enough weapons. Cambodian people had lived in peace. In 1970, when American sponsored a coup, overthrow Prince Sihanouk, Cambodia received plenty of assistance from the West, especially from American, including with the help of B-52, of jet Phantom, tank, modern weapon. Every time more gun into my country, always more suffering, more killing. Please help us. The Cambodian people need rice and medicine, not bullet.
This is the United Nations in New York. Only one country is denied a seat in the world community, Cambodia. Instead, the people of Cambodia are represented here by something called the Coalition of the Government of Democratic Kampuchea. But this is an illusion. It's not a coalition, it's not a government, it's not democratic, and it's not in Kampuchea. It's a cover behind which Pol Pot and his defunct regime are allowed to represent their victims. Just imagine if West Germany's seat in the United Nations was still occupied by Hitler's Third Reich in exile, and that the swastika flew here in United Nations Plaza in New York. And imagine if this barely credible state of affairs was largely the result of pressure by the major democracies, such as the United States and Britain. Well, that is exactly what has happened to Cambodia.
Even the European, even American, try to think that that flag is not important, but for the victim, they think that is like the Jews see the Hitler flag flying any place. It doesn't mean have to fly at the United Nations. If the Jews saw that flag flying anywhere, how you feel? You know this is no justice.
There certainly appears to be no justice when this man, Khieu Samphan, architect of Pol Pot's genocidal policy, becomes part of an international charade. In 1982, China and the United States invented the coalition, making Khieu Samphan foreign minister and Prince Sihanouk, Cambodia's former ruler, president. The aim was to appease growing international revulsion about the Khmer Rouge. In fact, nothing had changed. Pol Pot had merely stepped back into the shadows. The coalition's ambassador to the United Nations is Pol Pot's man, Thun Prasit. It was this man who was given the job of finding Cambodian intellectuals and students living abroad and persuading them to return home, where they were murdered. Today he occupies luxurious offices on 3rd Avenue in New York. On the face of it, the coalition consists of the Khmer Rouge and two so-called non-communist groups, one group led by Prince Sihanouk and the other by a former Prime Minister, Son Sann. They are the respectable face. But the Khmer Rouge dominates the coalition in every way. Above all, it has been a propaganda success. It has allowed both the Reagan and Bush administrations to distance themselves publicly from Pol Pot, while campaigning for American arms to be sent to the so-called non-communist members of the coalition, knowing that they will end up with the Khmer Rouge. The most important player in this game is Prince Sihanouk, promoted in Washington as the good guy of the coalition. Sihanouk has always been all things to all people. Here in Paris, he enjoys fine French cuisine with queue sampan, whose Khmer Rouge starved to death hundreds of thousands. Sihanouk ruled Cambodia as a despot until he was overthrown by the CIA in 1970, when he called on his people to join Pol Pot. Although a number of his own relatives were killed by the Khmer Rouge, Sihanouk broadcast Pol Pot's propaganda. In 1975, he flew to New York, where he knowingly lied to the United Nations about the true nature of the Khmer Rouge, claiming that the evacuation of Cambodia's cities and towns had been carried out without bloodshed, and that reports of executions were unfounded. This inspired many Cambodians to return home to a fate of torture and death. Sihanouk's collaboration continues today. On March the 17th, 1989, he wrote to supporters in the United States, thanking them for sending him, as he put it, a list of treasonous Cambodians whose crime was to visit their homeland. He signed himself President of Democratic Kampuchea, the Khmer Rouge government in exile. According to John Pedler, a former British diplomat who knows him well, Sihanouk remains in awe of the Khmer Rouge. They are like the rabbit and the snake, wrote Pedler. A hardcore Khmer Rouge is often amongst his entourage today, a constant reminder to him that his life is still in their hands.
I do not want a military solution to the problem, but a peaceful a political solution. But in order to get a political solution with Vietnam and the Soviet Union, we must fight first. And to fight is to have the Khmer Rouge also in the coalition, because they are the main fighting force.
Sihanouk has demanded a part for the Khmer Rouge in a Cambodian government. This is backed by both America and Britain.
The one thing we would not wish to see, above all else, is a return of the Khmer Rouge atrocities which happened those years ago. We would certainly not wish to see anything like that happen. That's why we took the view of Prince Sihanouk, who we regard as the person most likely to succeed in forming national unity. He felt that they should be a party to the quadripartite process. He felt that they were better on the inside than on the outside. The fact is they're there. You can't ignore the fact that they're there. It's better to try and get them on the inside than have them on the outside.
Are you aware that Prince Sihanouk's army fights side by side with the Khmer Rouge?
I don't know what's going to happen once the Vietnamese troops leave.
Well, no, I'm asking now. Are you aware that now Prince Sihanouk's army is fighting side by side with the Khmer Rouge?
Well, that may well be the case.
Just before Christmas last year, Margaret Thatcher gave an interview to the BBC children's programme Blue Peter, which has raised millions of pounds for Cambodia. She was asked what her government would do to help stop Pol Pot coming back to power. Most people agree, she said, that Pol Pot himself could not go back, nor some of his supporters, who were very active in some of the terrible things that happened. She then said, "Some of the Khmer Rouge, of course, are very different. I think there are probably two parts to the Khmer Rouge, those who supported Pol Pot, and then there is a much, much more reasonable grouping within the Khmer Rouge." The interviewer was clearly taken aback. "Do you really think so?" Mrs. Thatcher was asked, to which she replied, "Well, that is what I am assured by people who know, so that you will find that the more reasonable ones in the Khmer Rouge will have to play some part in a future government." Who exactly are these reasonable Khmer Rouge?
Who exactly? I don't know their names.
Well, surely it's rather important, isn't it, if Britain is supporting their inclusion in a future government in Cambodia? I mean, who are they?
Well, there are obviously some more reasonable than others. I mean, these are the ones who Prince Sihanouk can work with.
But you must know their names, surely.
Can we stop this now?
Why?
John, this was not the way that we were led to believe the line of questioning would go. It's now that I think the Minister is doing remarkably well under an aggressive line of questioning that we were not told that we had to brief the Minister for.
Well,
Yes, I think you should.
This is outrageous.
Yeah, if we knew.
At this point, the interview was cut short by a Foreign Office official, dismayed by my line of questioning. And of course, Khieu Samphan is one of the reasonable Khmer Rouge, a benign, smiling, white-haired diplomat wearing a business suit and striped tie, giving a diplomatic wave. When Khieu Samphan was asked what mistakes the Khmer Rouge had made, he smiled and replied that they were too slow to move against their enemies. In other words, they failed to kill enough people. On the surface, everything in Phnom Penh looks normal, but just below is a country literally falling apart. While we were there, 6 buildings collapsed in the center of the city, killing an unknown number of people. This, of course, was not news in the outside world. Every day, 2 people are electrocuted in the maze of exposed wires. Almost all the bridges are down. The roads are barely roads at all. A harvest may succeed, but the food can't get through. 10 years ago, this main highway was passable. Now mined by the Khmer Rouge and denied the kind of repair only development aid can provide, it has been reduced to hundreds of miles of potholes. Why, in your view, is development aid being denied to Cambodia?
I think development aid is being denied purely for political considerations. 10 years since the liberation from the Khmer Rouge, this government, the Heng Samrin government, is still not recognized by a majority of Western countries. Therefore, you cannot give it bilateral aid, you cannot give it UN development aid. It's still the only country in the world that's been denied UN development aid because of politics.
In June 1989, the United Nations Development Programme sent an exploratory mission to Cambodia. It was long dreamed of, the first hint of development aid in 10 years. It never arrived. The mission was vetoed in New York as its members flew to their first stop, Bangkok.
We heard that it was because of United States pressure and also Japanese pressure. So this mission is now in Thailand. It's in Bangkok, trying to do a study on Kampuchean development needs.
From Thailand? From
Thailand. I mean, does that make any sense?
Eva, 10 years ago, Cambodia received a lot of emergency aid, and yet so much is still needed in this country. What is the kind of aid that Cambodia should be getting now?
For example, the water supply situation in Kampuchea. This is the capital of the country, and the water situation is so poor. It affects a population of almost 1 million people that are living in the city now. The mains of the city, some of them are broken, so that even if the water leaves the waterworks clean, by the time it gets to the final source, it's recontaminated.
Less than 2% of Cambodians have access to uncontaminated water. The water supply system collapsed years ago. In Phnom Penh, bodies of Pol Pot's victims were found in the mains. Today, there's hardly any distinction between drinking water, drains and sewers, and the people here cannot change this. Their engineers were murdered, and they have no equipment.
The majority of the population in Phnom Penh are people who've come from the countryside, who don't have the same kinds of attitude about community hygiene that are necessary to prevent epidemics and contamination in the city. In the countryside, they live far apart. They're out in the open. The hazards are perhaps less than they are in the city where everyone is living together. So every year you have children dying of diarrhea. You have cholera even, and I'm surprised that there hasn't been a major epidemic in the last 10 years.
10 years ago, we filmed at this hospital, and the images drew an extraordinary response from people all over the world, if not from their politicians. We found this boy stricken with tuberculosis. His parents had been killed by the Khmer Rouge. No one knew his name. He was called boy number 10. The next day we came back, and he was dead. 10 years later, nothing had changed. This young woman lay stricken in the same place. She too had tuberculosis, a preventable disease which in 1975 Cambodia had almost eradicated, along with cerebral malaria. With help now denied by the World Health Organization, both diseases afflict a majority of the population. It's terrible that all these people have to be jammed into the corridor. There's so little room in this hospital.
The number of patients surpass the capacity of hospital.
Yeah. But it's often like this, I think,
and also
isn't
in
it?
the rainy season, you know, rainy season, more patients.
And there's a lot more diarrhea, intestinal diseases.
Yeah. Seasonal disease.
Could we stop here and ask this lady who's got 2 children here, what's wrong with them, Hang?
Fever and diarrhea. And vomiting.
Yeah. How long has the lady been in the corridor like this?
She has been here along with her 2 children for 3 days.
I see. Thank you. See, these children, they go from one disease to another. They suffer something as simple as diarrhea, but then it seems to inevitably lead on to something more serious.
Yeah.
I fear we're going to have the same story all the way down this corridor. Perhaps we could talk to this lady here with her little baby. Could you ask her how old the baby is and what's wrong with her?
The daughter is just 1 year old.
Right.
Firstly, she suffered measles. And now she cannot eat because something wrong in her mouth.
This child is also very, very malnourished, Hang.
She is, yeah.
Could you ask the mother now what kind of food this child is eating?
Yesterday she ate rice soup, but today she eat nothing. Just lie down. Yeah. And she just drink only soya milk.
Has the baby improved since she's been in hospital or not?
Yesterday she recovered, but today,
she suffered a relapse.
She suffered,
How long has she been lying out here on the floor in the corridor in these conditions?
The mother, and the daughter lie down here for 3 days.
3 days in these conditions on the floor with the flies. We filmed scenes like these 10 years ago, and this isn't a backwater, it's one of the main hospitals in the capital city. Why then are so many children still suffering in Cambodia? It could be said that they are no worse off than many children in other developing countries, and to some extent that's true, but there are vital differences here. No other country has experienced anything like the Pol Pot years, when most of the doctors and nurses were murdered and hospitals and clinics vandalized or destroyed, and the foundations of a society laid to waste have yet to be rebuilt. Today, Cambodia has one of the highest death rates of young children in the world. 1 in 5 die from malnutrition and preventable diseases like simple diarrhea, and they die for political reasons.
When I interviewed a few years ago someone in the British Embassy in Thailand, they said, you know, it's only 8 million people. I mean, our ties with China and our ties with the US are much more important than this 8 million people.
Only 8 million people?
Only 8 million people.
They were saying that those 8 million people are expendable.
That's exactly what they were saying, and they used the term expendable.
And here is one of those expendable people. Her name is Ratanak. She is 11 months old. Her mother is watching her die from dengue fever. Had there been basic equipment such as a respirator and plasma and drugs easily available in the West, she would have stood a chance. But these items are subject to international embargo. An hour after we filmed her, the baby died. Ten years ago, we filmed this train after it had been attacked by the Khmer Rouge when hundreds were killed. Today, it's still being attacked. The only difference is that you may see it now on the television news, now that Cambodia has been rediscovered. This year, an international conference on Cambodia was held in Paris. It was similar to Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's meetings with the Nazis in 1939, shortly before the invasion of Poland. Representatives of Western governments entertained the Khmer Rouge in their hotel rooms. The Australians even dropped genocide from their official language. One diplomat said, off the record of course, "We'll have to wait to see just how strong the Khmer Rouge are in the coming months." In other words, the world will wait for Pol Pot to return by force. In October, the Khmer Rouge informed the people of this area that when they do return, they will make the men into fertilizer and keep the women for reproduction.
I think the United States has to be clear, and we have to stop playing these rhetorical games, and we have to establish our #1 concern is for the Cambodian people, and that means that we throw all of our energies behind absolutely assuring that the Khmer Rouge are not able to return to power or to control any part of the government or the geography of Cambodia, and that indeed there's a message sent to the entire world community through a trial of Pol Pot and his top lieutenants that says that genocide, that the horrendous crimes committed by Pol Pot will be punished.
And the crimes continue today. These are civilian victims of Khmer Rouge mines, and they are not the worst pictures we could show. In this hospital, a few doctors have done remarkably well, with nothing. Some limbs have been saved from amputation with crude bamboo splints. Such is the ingenuity of a people fighting for their lives.
He was looking after oxen in the jungle nearby mountain.
And what happened?
The Khmer Rouge were shelling. It happened on last Wednesday.
Ask him, does he remember what happened?
The majority of people, the peasants, don't understand why the West continues to punish them. I mean, what do they have to do to show that they are human beings that have the same kind of basic human needs as in other countries? The majority of people are not political. They just want peace, they want stability, they want the best for their children. They want the same things that most people in other countries want, and they're being denied them.
I wish I could say that there was no longer a need to give money to the voluntary agencies to help the Cambodian people, but it's as needed as ever. In terms of trying to change the future, It's a political question. And we must ask people to pick up their pens and write to their politicians, to their president, to their prime minister, to their members of parliament, to their foreign ministry, and ask their government to take the action of outlawing the Khmer Rouge from the international community. Every letter counts. It will stop the inclination, which there is no doubt the governments of the West will have, to try to push this matter aside and pretend it isn't there. It's no use saying we don't recognize, we don't want them back. They've actually got to act on that, and they've got to expel them from the United Nations. And everybody watching this program can help that to happen.
When you bring the Khmer Rouge back into the city, that means you bring the killing into the city. We know that the Khmer Rouge are in the jungle. Why the world try to bring him back into the city and take us to the killing field again?
The disturbing pictures you have seen are from a country that has become almost the home of tragedy. This need not be so. Left alone, the countries of the region, Cambodia, Thailand and Vietnam, could learn to live with each other and to isolate Pol Pot. All that Western governments have to do is to stop backing the most thorough mass murderers of our time and to see that development aid reaches the people of Cambodia quickly. The alternative is for the present cynical game to go on. But to what end? How long must the United States continue its war of revenge against Vietnam? And how long must other governments, like Britain's, support this obsession and the interests of China instead of matching the expressed humanity and generosity of their own people? What is certain is that Pol Pot and his gang will go along with the game. They may even appear reasonable, as Mrs. Thatcher imagines some of them to be. They may even accept a minority role in a future Cambodian government, as demanded by Washington. Even Prince Sihanouk has warned that those governments supporting Pol Pot, in whatever form, for whatever reason, must accept responsibility for a new Holocaust. People here have no doubt about it. Of course, they say it won't be like last time. They'll fight back. Imagine their fear. Surely the time for preventing it is now, or do we have to wait until it's too late?
However the Cambodian situation unfolds, it is certain to affect the politics and future of all of Southeast Asia. Perhaps the most interesting and significant aspect to this is the West's reaction to Vietnam. Since Ho Chi Minh's victory in 1975 and its invasion of Cambodia in 1978-79, Vietnam has been totally ostracized by the United States and most Western powers. No trade, no economic assistance. Hence her dependence on the Soviet Union. Vietnam has consequently become one of the poorest countries in the world. And one of the main reasons for her withdrawing from Cambodia is to encourage more Western investment and trade with Vietnam. As ironic as it might seem, a more liberal and supportive attitude on the part of Western countries towards the government of Vietnam would very much soften the anger, bitterness, and poverty in the region, and take the wind out of the sails of the Khmer Rouge, ideologically speaking. In other words, would work